The following is copywritten intellectual property. Note that all rights are reserved to the writer. Any and all infringements in any capacity shall be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. With that being said, the listener, by choosing to proceed, understands and therefore agrees to the authority legally allotted to the writer. 7. Subcognizant discrepancies. Examples of C-S application S. Subcognizant discrepancies is the tactic of implanting minor inconsistencies throughout the course of the interaction. In the spirits of his plausible deniability, he will commonly remand the tactic's application to the peripherals of the interaction. It is performed as easily as moving any object in the while his target is not focusing on the object or absent from the room in some form. Thus, the target subconsciously perceives the former static environment to be under a subtle flux. The target remanded to oblivion as what is the cause of this sensation is ripe for his false dilemma. Contemplative, during which he must choose between attempting to disavow the disturbance, or revoke plausible deniability to discover the nature of their inclinations. Another prevalent variation of his tactic is to use inconsistent false tells. This is often observed by when he deems it advantageous for the target to assume him of deceit via his displayed idiopathic idiosyncrasies. Hence remanding the target the standard mediums to gauge an individual, yet just simply erratic enough to render any possible deduction as speculation. 8. Benign hypnosis. Examples of C-S application S. Benign hypnosis is the act of communicating with another person (S) indirectly while upholding plausible deniability to render them susceptible to engage in interaction. This act is most commonly observed to be executed with an intelligible audio range of the target, yet is not limited to the audio medium. Another common method is tactful signs placed in routine paths or frequented areas, i.e. the passive-aggressive technique of anonymous notes or symbolic references to a specific noun or verb. The C-S usual tendencies, for the sake of his plausible deniability, will be to strategically inspire the use of his tactic in his targets to negate their own. The methods of conduct must vary from the circumstances of one scenario (S) to the next. Inevitably, the one prerequisite necessary is the activation of his socio-empathetic manifestation. Regardless of whether it is demonstrable in the C-S or the target, it is the first indication of the presence is acknowledging the interaction. Point 9. Schizophrenia engineering. Examples of C-S application S. Schizophrenia engineering, or more commonly referred to as the schizophrenia engine, is a formula for cognitive analysis during which the observer renders the nouns malleable to study the causal mechanics for the multitude of applications. It is an expansion upon the Freudian slip, in which a person subconsciously replaces a key word, often a noun or verb, and illustrates so that they were attempting to conceal. In the case of the schizophrenia engine, the same indications are relevant, yet they are illustrated throughout the entire course of the interaction. The more demonstrable mediums of indication have the various subject matters, even more importantly the effects on their disposition, and their conveyed opinion of the subject's connotation. The process entails 4 stages in its execution and as followed. Observation. The C-S will dissect and denote every word and sentence to cogitate the nature of it. Noun redaction. The C-S will render every noun lucid to the connotation of the interaction as a whole. Noun replacement. The C-S will then replace every lucid noun with another noun that pertains to said sentence to correlate the comment to the interaction's connotations. Hypothesis. The C-S will gauge the possible interpretations compared with the initial observation to deduce the most probable. This tactic is also applied to any media he encounters and can perceive it to be about himself. B. The Zeitgeist's definitive observations and interpretations. Examples of Zeitgeist observations and interpretations. 1. Predation. We are all individuals, hence, predation is act of one individual subjugating another. In the spectrum of interaction, the most notable form and cause is that of psychological ostracism. Regardless if the tactic is initiated by the dominant or subordinate (S), the cause is of conjecture of said predation pre-existence. Thus the participants undergo a brief courtship of establishing their roles to themselves. Within this foundational stage of the interaction lies rife with predominantly subtle and insinuative attempts to either assert or debate role designations. If the entities oblige establishing and communicating their roles, then the connotations of the interaction are often found to be complementary. If the parties are found to be in disagreement, the candor is often combative and or chaotic. Regardless of the entity's hostility, the evolution of the interaction is dictated by their idiosyncrasies. Said involved parties commonly find that it is more productive to remand such from demonstration and seek out subversive means. Within the dictum allotted by obliging, plausible deniability, the hopeful dominant specimen has a greater probability of securing a subordinate. In the majority of interactions, the zeitgeist has deduced that the axioms of predation in interaction itself is as such. 1. Most are impatient to speak, thus virtually incapable of listening. 2. The few with reserve act courteously for aesthetic's sake and the perpetuation of the interaction. 3. Most talk at him, or to themselves vicariously through him, and the connotations of the interaction. 4. Most have limited premeditated contingencies for potential responses and mostly answer to them. 5. Most will deduce their assumptions of his intentions as fact and attempt to control the progression of said interaction by subversive means. 6. Most interpret the act of verifying miscommunications to be subversive in nature. 7. Most bear the guise of subordination to engage in predation unabated. 2. Self-victimization. Self-victimization is the condition in which an individual will decide they are a victim of various circumstances to negate themselves the responsibility of their actions, thus, by disavowing their means from their ends they have upheld the prerequisite of plausible deniability. Bearing this calculation behind the guise of a convoluted psychological state enables the individual to facilitate their desires unabated. When confronted on the matter, they perpetuate this tactic by brandishing an arsenal of subsidiary fodder subjects, designed to simultaneously excuse their actions and divert attention from their persistence. Regardless of the ends the individual intends to see to fruition by engaging in this tactic, it is inevitably sadomasochism. This tactic is actualized and aided by all denoted zeitgeist tactics, predation, the doppelganger effect, the perpetual angst circuit, socio-subversion, ego gratification, cognizant predestination, and enlightenment's crescendo. 3. Doppelganger effect. Examples of zeitgeist's observations and interpretations. The doppelganger effect is the phenomenon when two or more entities engage in an interaction in which one entity is dominant and the other left parenthesis as obliged subordinately. This act is most notable for indicating predation and illustrating the individual's awareness, disposition, and capabilities therein, which facilitates all denoted zeitgeist tactics, predation, self-victimization, perpetual angst circuit, socio-subversion, ego gratification, and cognizant predestination. 4. Plausible deniability. The single most notable opposition to litigation is that the accused's plausible deniability must be revoked by the due processes of law. Thus, to make any speculative proclamations that are unsubstantiated, it is immensely detrimental to the accuser's chosen tactics if so brash in conduct. Since the zeitgeist is in a perpetual litigation against the commonly denoted universe, he is forced to uphold this principle lest he suffer the shrills of presumptuous prosecution predominantly pervaded for malice and ignorance. This principle facilitates the means to the majority of his denoted tactics. It is the prevailing false dilemma that the target is forced to perceive, and if cultured diligently enables the zeitgeist to use plausible deniability as a proverbial pick. Such a tactic is the foundation to any passive-aggressive or subversive means to dominance. The most common incarnation of plausible deniability, demonstrable by the adherence to his tact of vague subjects,